And didn't you get accepted to 2 different medical schools or universities?
Yeah, I was going to go. A friend of mine from Pennard, out on the other side of the Gower, was going to become an engineer, and he got accepted in King's College London. So I thought that'd be nice. I could go to school with him. So I interviewed at King's. I got accepted at King's, and then when I went up for an interview, they got me to talk to some of the patients. And they were Cockneys. I couldn't understand what they said. So I said, well, that's not going to be any good. So I then applied for the medical school in Cardiff and got accepted.
Because they all had Welsh accents?
What?
Because they had Welsh accents?
No, but there were many more Welsh people in the medical school. There was, and then when I got to medical school, as I was going through medical school, when I passed my things to getting close to finalizing my degree, I realized that the neurosurgeon in the medical school, the senior neurosurgeon in the medical school, was the neurosurgeon who years ago had saved my brother's life. So I went to see him and I told him who I was, and I asked him if I could come and work to him, because I really, he was kind of he was very well thought of in our family. And so my first job was in neurosurgery with him. And he was thought of as a very strict, kind of guy. I mean, the stories about him for his residents were, one of them wanted to have his hair cut. And so he looked at his haircut and he said, a couple of weeks, he said, wouldn't let him go for a haircut. Then another guy then wanted to take his girlfriend out to dinner because they just got engaged. And he said, that it would be okay in about a month's time. He told him that time off was a privilege and not a right. But for me, he was wonderful. I played the viola, and he would get me around to his house to play the viola. He had a string quartet. He would get me around that, and then he would take me to the university string quartet every Tuesday. So he was I had a wonderful time with him. I worked with him for 6 months.
Wow.
And at medical school, for me, was wonderful. My life was kind of like science, and medical school was just an extension of the science that I'd learned in high school. So I loved medical school. I didn't have any problems with passing the exams.
And didn't you do lots of other things too, like rugby?
What?
Didn't you do other things at the school besides class?
Yeah, when I went to medical school, I started playing rugby for the medical school and started drinking alcohol. So I was drinking beer, because that's what you did if you played rugby. If you played rugby, you drank beer, see. So when I was drinking, I would sing tenor. And when I wasn't drinking, I'd sing baritone. So I went to the Royal School of Music in the Castle in Cardiff, and I found the tenor teacher. And I told him what the problem was, and I said, okay, you face the window, I'll play some arpeggios and you sing them. So he played, and he listened to me singing, and he said, don't ever sing baritone again. And then I went to him then for 3 years to learn how to sing tenor. And he taught me how to sing, really good tenor. I could sing up to B flat. I was never very good at singing C, but I could sing B flat very well. So I went to medical school and I went to music school. And I played the viola in the National Youth Orchestra. I had a fiddle in the high school. They would lend you an instrument and they would teach you how to play it. So I played the fiddle for a few years, and then when I was about 16, I I realised that I wasn't very good at playing the violin. But I asked one of the teachers in the village, Bryn Evans, if I could borrow his viola. I borrowed the viola in January, and in July I was in the National Youth Orchestra playing the viola.
But your parents didn't go see you?
My parents didn't go to a single concert that they played in. I had to go to the National Youth Orchestra with money from Auntie Ruth and Uncle Mel. Know that? I mean, if one of you children came to me and told me that you were going to play the fiddle in the National Youth Orchestra, there'd be nothing that I wouldn't do to help you. I'd go everywhere with you. They were afraid, see, that I wouldn't be able to do the medical school stuff and play the instrument. Because I mean, they'd left school when they were 12. My mother became like a maid in a house, and my father drove a bicycle for a grocery place, so he would deliver groceries. But when they were 12, so they had no idea about what was happening in school. I mean, when it came to talking about sex and things, my mother told my father that he should go and talk to me about the facts of life.
Mm-hmm.
So he took me out to the kitchen and he said, my father protested to my mother that I would know it, I was smart, and I was in school, I would have learned all this stuff. And she said, so he went out to the kitchen and he said, did they teach you the stuff about the rabbits at school? And I said, yeah. And he turned to my mother and he said, there you are, see? That was it.
That's funny. That's funny.
So, and then the village was incredible to grow up in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you were at the sea. Us boys used to take bicycles and we would ride 10 or 15 miles to the other side of the Gower where the nice part was and the nice sandy beaches were.
Mm. And didn't you have a job in elementary school or middle school?
I had a job in high school. I saw a job in the... My father wanted me to put muscles on because I was pretty skinny. I was 125 pounds leaving school. And he sent me to a bodybuilding class because my cousin Peter was Mr. Wales. You know, he was an amateur bodybuilder. So he found me jobs working on building sites, building houses, making cement. So I found a job for myself in the newspaper as a kitchen porter. I didn't know what a kitchen porter was, but I went over to the hotel, and they said they would give me the job. It was fine. When I started the job, it was an ugly job. It was carrying out the dustbins from the kitchen and cleaning the kitchen floors and things like that. So there were two chefs, Ludwig Obara from Poland, who fought with the Germans during the war.
Wow.
And Mechkovsky, I've forgotten what Mechkovsky's name was now. Mechkovsky fought with the Russians during the war. And of course, when where the chips were down, they were throwing knives at each other. But Ludwig Obara took me to one side and he said, "You too smart to be kitchen porter," he said. "I teach you be breakfast cook." So the next morning he gave me a chef's white uniform and he taught me how to make breakfast in the hotel. You know, ham and eggs and stuff like that. And the ladies in the bar was run by women. It was a gang of sisters and their daughters who ran the bar, and they wanted somebody to move the beer and stuff like that. So the next vacation, they took me on as a barman. And the story about that is that the owner would sit in the bar in the evening, you know, having a drink, and he could count the money in the till hour by hour. So he could tell you, good night tonight, you know, we've taken $1,000. And he was nice to me. And it was on a wonderful beach. It was called the Caswell Bay Hotel. And there was a beach right down there at the bottom of the hill. So you could, when you weren't working, you could go and sit on the beach, and it was really very nice, very pretty.
But when you were in elementary school, didn't you have to take the little kids home?
Oh, I started school. There was a little Welsh school in the village, run by Miss Gwynn. And Miss Gwynn would take the kids to school if they were clean and dry. So as soon as I was clean and dry, my mother took me along and put me in school, in kindergarten. I was 2.5 years old. And my job was to take the other kids who'd wet themselves home to change their underwear. So I would take the kids home, and the mothers would give me, you know, a little cookie and a glass of milk. So that was really very interesting. And I was always thought of as being very smart. Auntie Macon called me Lord Muck. And
what did that mean?
Oh, Lord Muck, you know, like nothing, like somebody who thought that he was very smart, behaved that he was very smart. So I was Lord Muck to Auntie Macon. I mean, she wasn't rude about it. It was just, that's how she saw me. She saw me as being very smart. And then when you had to pass an exam to go to grammar school. If you passed the exam, they would pay you money to go to the grammar school, see. So I worked very hard, and I was very clever. I mean, in those days it was only English and mathematics. And when the exam results came back, I passed top of the county. And my mother was so delighted. Oh, golly. And that led me into high school then.
Mm-hmm. Didn't the teachers used to ask you what different words meant?
Yeah, the teachers in the school, there were people who would come around to test the children, you know, at some time when they were 7, 8, 9, 10. And they came around and they asked the children what these fancy words meant. And the teachers didn't know. So she said, what did they ask you? So I said, well, they asked me the word for phthisis, Phthhisis. And they said, what was that? I said, oh, it's an old-fashioned word for tuberculosis. Oh, they couldn't believe how smart I was. Oh boy.
Right.
That was the nicest time in school, because I was much smarter than the other kids, and all the classes were just. They weren't divided into smart kids, you know. There were kids in my class who couldn't read or write, there was a cane, there was a bamboo cane, and you got hit if you got things wrong. And if you were really bad, the school teacher would hit you with a bamboo cane. Then they would send it on to the principal, and the principal would hit you with a bamboo cane.
Oh, Lord.